Magandang umaga po mga kaibigan. Whether we like it or not, COVID-19 is a reality. This is serious sapagkat meron na po namang 1,500,000 at 77,000 at 689 na kaso ng COVID ang naitala sa Pilipinas mula nung nakalipas na taon. Sa pinakahuling impormasyon mula po naman sa Department of Health, may 8,735 bagong kaso na naitala kahapon. May 5,930 naka-recover at may 127 pumanaw. Tayo ba ay nasa second wave na? Sinasabi rin po naman ng Department of Health na mayroong 63,646 active cases. At mayroong 1,506,027 recoveries with 28,016 fatalities. Definitely, this is a big number. Think of those who were afflicted by COVID-19 and they had nowhere to go. How has the government attended to expectant mothers who got the virus? Are there many orphaned children due to the loss of their parents due to COVID-19? What do we know of the Delta variant? How effective is the country's contact tracing? How extensive is our testing capabilities? Sa dinami-dami ng testing centers, saan nagtutungo ang ating mga kababayan? The question remains, how can ordinary Filipinos avail of testing for their peace of mind? So today, we're joined by a group of resource persons na maaasahan natin. We have with us Dr. Teodoro Herbosa, Special Advisor to the Chief Implementer of the National Task Force versus COVID-19. He's a former Undersecretary of the Department of Health. We're joined all the way from Germany by Father Nicanor Austriaco, a molecular biologist and professor of biological sciences at the University of Santo Tomas. We will be joined by Engineer Alberto Swansing, Special Advisor to the DOTR Secretary and former Chair of the LTFRB and former Assistant Secretary of the Land Transportation Office. We have with us Attorney Ariel Inton, the President of the Lawyers for Commuter Safety and Protection. And we're expecting a representative from the Department of Health and the Metro Manila Development Authority, and no less than the designated testing czar, Secretary Vince Dizon. Let's start. Let's hear from Dr. Ted Herbosa. Ano po ang pinakahuling informasyon mula sa inyo? Please give us your opening statements.
Well, my opening statement is that the Delta variant is already here in the Philippines in different regions. NCR is going to implement a lockdown or an ECQ from August 6 to August 6 plus 4 to August 30. And we need to really follow the minimum public health standards. The science behind the transmission of the Delta variant is very clear. It is 4 times more transmissible than the previous variants, the Alpha and the original Wuhan. So it can infect more people. What does that mean? It can overwhelm our health system the same way we have seen situations in India and in Indonesia and Myanmar, wherein the health system would collapse. So this is our move to actually protect the health system, make sure that we slow down or flatten the curve of new cases so that we can adapt and, as you said, improve our testing, improve our contact tracing, and improve our quarantine and isolation of all cases of COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ted Herbosa. May I now call on our good friend all the way from Germany, Father Nick Austriaco, a molecular biologist and professor of biological sciences at the University of Santo Tomas. Good morning, Father. I'm sorry to have kept you waiting. It's 3
That's
o'clock
all
in the
right.
morning in Germany.
Good morning, Sir Melo, and good morning to all of you in the Philippines. I echo everything that Dr. Ted Herbosa pointed out. What I think I would like to comment on is the recent CDC data that has come out from the United States in the last few days that highlights the unique challenges posed by the Delta variant. So as Dr. Herbosa has pointed out, it's highly transmissible, and it has been compared to chickenpox in the United States, which for many parents are aware is incredibly transmissible with an R value. In other words, the number of people that a single person can infect is compared to something like 6 to 8, maybe even 9. The concerns that were raised in the last few days in the United States relate to how vaccinated individuals who are themselves protected against infection from COVID-19 appear to be able to carry as much virus as unvaccinated people. So the concern here is that the viral load for vaccinated and unvaccinated people is comparable, at least for the first 6 days of the infection. And the concern, therefore, is that vaccinated individuals, even though they may never succumb to Delta, may become carriers that would lead to transmission, unwitting transmission to unvaccinated people in their families. And I know in the United States, this has triggered concern because many children are unvaccinated. And so parents are worried that even though they themselves are vaccinated, they would bring the Delta back home to infect their children. So as you may or may not know, the CDC in the United States has reinstituted its recommendation for vaccinated and unvaccinated Americans to resume wearing masks, especially indoors, in order to prevent the transmission of this. Now, as Dr. Herbosa pointed out, I am hopeful that the 2-week ECQ that will begin this Friday will go a long way at breaking the existing chains of transmission, that our contact tracing will be able to identify all positive individuals currently in the NCR, and that the 4 million extra doses of vaccines that will be deployed in the NCR in the next few weeks will sufficiently increase the number of fully vaccinated Filipinos in the NCR so that once we exit the ECQ, the continued spread of the Delta variant would be mitigated. This, of course, is the hope and the prayer.
Okay. Thank you very much, Father. It appears to be a very difficult job for us to keep it, how to go against or stem the spread of this Delta variant. Now, I just don't know how Attorney Inton, coming from the lawyers for commuter safety and protection, look at this, because definitely people will still try to move, especially those working. Attorney Inton, please.
Melo, magandang umaga sa iyo, Melo. Magandang umaga sa ibang mga bisita, sa mga kasapi po ng media. Well, unang statement po namin is katulad ng sinabi nyo, no, Melo, people will still be going out. No? Bakit? Number one, no? The ayuda is in cash. So, anong gagawin ng mga tao sa cash? Ibibili. So, lalabas. Marami pa rin magpapabakuna. No? So, unless they will do it door to door, no, lalabas pa rin ang mga magpapabakuna. First, second dose. Pangatlo, frontliners, saka yung mga APOR. These people, majority of them, walang sariling sasakyan. So ang amin pong panawagan, and I think no, na napakinggan naman, no, public transport should not be suspended totally. It should be allowed to operate as an essential industry to cater to the passengers. No? Natuto na kailangan matuto tayo sa nangyari noong season 1 and season 2 ng ECQ, where according to Sharon Garin, Congresswoman Sharon Garin, conservatively, the economy lost 21 billion pesos a month, no? Sa land transport pa lang yan. Ngayon, ako nagpapasalamat, meron po tayong mga andyan po si Doktor, dahil ako po mismo may mga katanungan po ako na sa akin po mga column, programa, lagi kong tinatanong, no? Siguro dito, Melo, these questions in my head, no, will be answered. Hindi ko lang alam kung I will be satisfied with the answer, no? Pero marami po akong itatanong, no? Marami po akong itatanong dahil nalilito po ang tao, no? Nalilito ang tao. So pag may pagkakataon, Melo, I could ask questions also.
Sure.
You, to our guests, I would do so.
Yes, that will be very welcome. No? That will be very welcome. We'd like to find out how things are because I'm in receipt of a Section 4 allegedly coming from a resolution. Dr. Ted Herbosa, it says, presentation of vaccination cards in public and private markets, supermarkets, and convenience stores and department stores. Is there truth to this? Dr. Ted, please. Dr. Herbosa.
Can you repeat the question?
Is there truth to this particular quotation from an ITF resolution, if I'm not mistaken? It says Section 4, presentation of vaccination cards in public and private markets, supermarkets, convenience stores, and department stores. Effective August 25, only vaccinated persons upon presentation of their vaccination card shall be allowed to enter public and private markets, including department stores, supermarkets, grocery stores, and convenience stores.
Okay, so regarding the vaccination card, as of now, the one that is issuing a vaccination card is the LGU that implemented the vaccination to our vaccinees. Unfortunately, there is no way of checking whether what you show is a true vaccination card or a fake vaccination card. So the DICT was actually ordered by the IATF to establish a standard vaccination card, and the vaccination card is going to be computer digital. It can be put on your cell phone, or it can be printed out as a QR code so that it can be read, and there will be less chance of faking the QR code. So if you notice, I think they're implementing later in August because I think the beta test is only starting this coming week in terms of the listing, because there's a master list of all those Filipinos, 20 million of them that's been vaccinated, and some of the LGUs have not submitted their complete list. So you may end up with a situation wherein you're trying to get your ID and it will say name not found. So that's going to be a problem if your LGU has not submitted your name as fully vaccinated. So there is still a continuing, I would say this is work in progress. The policy is good, but as Father Nick has said, even the vaccinees, if they are vaccinated, fully vaccinated, because they suffer mild symptoms only, can be the medium of transmission of the Delta variant. So we need to be cautious and really go out only if we need to go out and buy essential supplies for our survival.
Okay.
That's it, Melo.
Okay. Father Nick, I have to ask you this. How important is the vaccine? Because...
Hello?
Yeah. Yes?
Hello?
Uh-huh.
Melo, if I may, Melo, para tuloy-tuloy yung para kay Doktor, meron po akong mga ilang katanungan.
Attorney Inton, sandali lang, no? May nakarating din kasing tanong dito, parang merong mga pagdududa sa bakuna. So coming from a molecular biologist and a researcher, Father Nick, how important is the vaccine? Because there are people who entertain thoughts na merong malaking conspiracy at para mag-depopulate ang daigdig. You know, I received the word from a kababayan na ayaw niyang pabakunahan yung anak niya because of this theory. No? How is it?
So there are so many misinformation and conspiracy theories out there. I regularly receive texts and emails about people who believe that they have been microchipped because of the vaccine. However, one of the things that is absolutely clear is that in countries where vaccinations have been successful, the Delta variant spread has been limited by those vaccines. And people who've been vaccinated are protected after the second dose from serious disease, hospitalization, and death. And even those breakthrough infections that we are seeing in the United States, for those people who've been fully vaccinated, they may get COVID, but it's incredibly mild. So all of the science is telling us that, especially in light of the Delta threat, to protect ourselves and our families, we should go and get ourselves vaccinated with the first vaccine that is offered to us.
Okay. All right. So how do we combat this misconceptions or misinformation?
Well, I mean, I do it one person at a time. A lot of people have asked me. I've talked to pregnant women women who are concerned that the vaccines will make them infertile. And I point out that 4 billion people have been vaccinated around the world. Babies have been conceived, and this time, babies have been born who actually are immune to COVID-19 because they inherit the antibodies from their mothers. So there is no data at this time to support many, if not most, of all of the conspiracy theories that we are hearing especially in social media.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Dr. Ted, please add to the discussion before I give way to Ariel. On the vaccine thing, yeah.
Well, there are many things we do not know. I have to be truthful about that. In this pandemic, the biggest problem we've had has been risk communication. When a vaccine is produced, we do not know everything about its efficacy and its how it will behave in the real world. What we know is what has been published and done during controlled experimental trials and our interpretation and projection of those data. But when you start to give it to millions or billions of people, you start to see different things or report new side effects. So the science is evolving. So that's what I can say. To simplify it, it's like some drugs that we brought out to the market. We've even pulled them out and banned them because they caused certain side effects that were never seen during the time they were being studied. So many of the things you will hear is because of controlled studies and scientific studies in a controlled environment or cohort of patients. Of course, there are uncertainties. Of course, there will be theories, but we prevent the people from listening to these theories until they have been proven or disproved by scientific fact and evidence finding. So let's listen to the experts who know how to interpret the data, because many are trying to become pseudoscientists and trying to look at every news article and every social media post and then make their own conclusion like a scientist would do. Scientists would interpret data based on what are available to them. So let's listen to experts like Father Nick. Father Nick has been working a lot in this field. So he knows, I mean, I listen to him because I'm a clinician and I do work at the other end, which is the emergency department and how emergency patients present to us. But I may see things he doesn't see. He may see things I do not see. So that's why many experts may be saying different things at different times, because we use different lenses in looking at a similar problem. It's like the story of the elephant with the six blind men who are describing different things. So experts are not contradicting each other. They're describing the facts that they see based on what is available to them. And this is what becomes confusing to the lay, to the uneducated. This becomes very complicated and complex. And I I warn people who try to become pseudoscientists and make their own conclusions and then follow up with the, become iced, there's icing put on it because of this conspiracy theories. That's all, Melo. Thank you.
Yeah, but don't you think this doubts about vaccines were aggravated by the Dengvaxia scare of previous years?
Definitely, no. The way Dengvaxia was implemented was rushed. I know that because I created the hashtag Why Rush Dengue Vax, and you will see that after it was implemented to about 800 children, about 150 were documented to have died. Now, if I look at a vaccine as a clinician, a vaccine mustn't cause death. It must prevent death. So the moment it causes one death, that's one death too many for a drug that is preventable, for a drug that's supposed to prevent disease. So to me, that's not commercially viable. But then they discovered later on that Dengvaxia was given wrongly. It was implemented wrongly in this country. That's why there's still Dengvaxia in other countries that have dengue, because they used the Philippine experience, analyzed it, and discovered that you cannot give dengue to a dengue naive. Oh, how do I now simplify that? Someone who has never had dengue. You cannot give the Dengvaxia to someone who's never had dengue. That was the politically incorrect thing to do. The intention was good, help save people where there's lots of dengue, but you killed people. So the path to hell is paved with good intentions. So basically, that's what happened. And now, what happened? Everybody became hesitant with vaccines, and even the decades proven vaccines like measles, mumps, rubella, all these vaccines became feared, and our vaccination rates went down. And we even had a polio outbreak in 2019, and we just finished vaccinating, and we've been declared polio free again. So I really think there's all of these factors creating a perfect storm. So like right now, the government has done very well in creating vaccine acceptance. In fact, vaccine envy. Everybody wants to get that vaccine, even if they think, even if it's still experimental. So why are people saying we let the private sector buy it? I heard that comment over the weekend. Let the private sector, so it will be faster. The problem is, once you do that, how do you handle fake vaccines? How do you handle people who start selling vials of vaccine that you don't know really came from the manufacturer? So that's another problem. So you can create problems out of a solution that you think is a good solution, but there are unintended consequences. Thank you, Melo.
Yeah, thank you. Attorney Inton, I know you have some questions before I introduce Mr. Leonardo De Leon, who's part of our resource
Thank
person.
you, Melo.
Yes, please.
Gusto ko lang itanong sa ating mga eksperto, no, kay Doc sa kay Father, no. Probably I am one of the uneducated, no, dito sa anong ito, na umaasa lang kami kung ano ang nababasa namin, naririnig namin sa media, ano yung maaari, ano yung posible, etc. Now, these are probably the questions. Ito, no, sa ano namin, sa aming mga interview, research, na dahil meron kaming ganyan dito sa Lawyers for Community Safety and Protection, these are the questions that we would like experts to answer. No? Number one, according to DOH, sabi nila, the lockdown is for the purpose of preparing our health system. But it will not stop the spread of the virus. Ang tanong ko po doon, ano po ba ibig sabihin nun? Na it will not stop the spread of the virus. Pagka ganito po ba, aasahan natin na magkakaroon pa ulit tayo ng lockdown?
Okay.
Dr. Ted, maybe you should go first for that.
Okay,
No,
so
yes,
thank you.
please.
I was going to
the
offer
DOH.
Father the chance to be the first, but since you requested, how can I refute Father?
The DOH,
Father
I want
Okay.
I want the DOH, the official government answer to that first, and then I can comment on it later.
Okay, so
Ano
to
po
Attorney
ba, no?
Inton, the science
This is,
behind
excuse me, Doc. Ito pong I quoted from newspaper reports. the spokesperson of DOH said that it will not stop the spread of the virus. Tama po ba yung kanyang statement? Or I really don't know. Kaya nga po humihingi kami ng
Correct. So let me start
kasagutan.
with the premise. Parang abogado ako, no? So I will start with the premise and defend the Department of Health in that statement because magre-decide ka kagad guilty or not guilty. So I have to give the premise. The premise is to that is how does the virus SARS-CoV-2 spread? It spreads from person to person. The more people there are, the more transmissions happen. The more transmissions happen, the more people get hospitalized. Now, what does a lockdown do? What does a lockdown decreases the chance of people seeing other people who are infected. So what will it do? It will decrease transmission, but it will not stop transmission. Very important, no? Be clarified with that. When you do a lockdown, it will not stop. As you said, people will go out, they'll be given ayuda, they will go out and buy food. When they meet in the palengke, they can meet with someone who is positive and they can bring home the infection. So, but if you decrease those chances, you impose a curfew, you let people work from home, you will decrease the numbers. So when you decrease the numbers, you flatten the curve. When you flatten the curve, you save the hospital system from collapsing. So yeah, that is the objective of implementing this. And as you flatten the curve, once you open up, transmission will go up again. But hopefully by that time, we will be our beds are not full, our contact tracers are available, and our testing laboratories are available. So that is the science behind this. The answer to your question, will there still be a lockdown? Of course, if the hospital system is threatened, our only answer to that now is not build more hospitals, but to impose another restriction of mobility so that the hospitals can breathe, so that the doctors can have a timeout. So that's the principle, and that's how we live with it. This is a current situation. It is evolving. I wish we had a health system that was as robust as other countries, wherein we had enough beds for everybody. Then we don't have to do lockdown. We can keep the economy open, just like in Florida, and then let people die. So to me, it's very important. It's a balance between economics. It's a balance between economics and health. You cannot dissociate the two. Many of the economists and businessmen think they're right because people will die of hunger. Well, I'm telling you, the scientists are also right. If we just let this virus go forever, there will be more unnecessary deaths. And that's what we're trying to prevent in public health. Sige, Father Nick, ikaw naman.
Well, let me add to Dr. Ted. So, a lawyer, Ariel, I think your primary concern is whether or not we are going to enter a pattern of lockdowns over the next 6 months that will just continue for the next 6 months, right? So that is your concern. I'm hearing that concern. And I think what I would like to do to add to Dr. Ted is to point out that alongside this lockdown is this vaccination effort. So the vaccination effort is an attempt to increase population immunity in Metro Manila. So it is clear that by the time, if we are able to attain 50% fully vaccinated or more, you can see that what happened in the States is that the spread of the Delta variant in vaccinated populations is significantly slower. So if this is the case, as Dr. Ted points out, we may never have to lock down again, because if the spread is slow enough, because the number of vaccinated people is high enough, the healthcare system will be protected, right? So which is why in the next 3 weeks, the national government is prioritizing the NCR to increase this population immunity so that hopefully on August 20th, when we reopen again and the virus will begin to spread, it will always bring spread. The spread will be slow enough and not explosive like you see in Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia, that we will not have to close lockdown again, right? So, and as the time passes, more and more Filipinos, more and more of our kababayans will be vaccinated. And the target for the NCR, of course, is November 28th. And if we get to November 28th without a lockdown, another lockdown, it is likely that if we reach a 70-75% herd immunity, population immunity by then, the chances of having another lockdown are substantially lower. So you see that in the United States. So Dr. Fauci was on TV earlier today, and he said despite the Delta threat, he does not expect the United States to enter into lockdown ever again. And this is true. So the population immunity, especially in the Northeast and significant parts of the United States, is high enough that even with the Delta threat, the hospitals are relatively safe. So you have to understand that it's not just that we are preparing for a surge. You see, the language suggests that you're preparing for a surge. We are not only preparing for a surge, but we are trying to blunt the surge and prevent future surges. So all of this is happening in the next 3 weeks. And whether or not we are successful will depend on so many factors.
Attorney Ariel?
Yes, thank you, Father. Follow-up question, no? Yung sinabi ni Father at ni Doktor, no, is for us to protect the health system in order not to overwhelm the health system. Sa statistics, no, yung kanina sinabi nga ni ni Melo, and of course my fellow guests, I hope you don't mind if I ask you these questions kasi ito yung mga tinatanong sa amin, no? Hindi naman po ako doktor. So, kung ang tatanong sa akin kung guilty ba o not guilty, maaari kong sagutin yan. No?
Of course.
Kaya lang, itong mga tanong na to, pang doktor kasi to, pang eksperto. So ito
Okay.
po yung isang tanong din. Out of, the data says that the COVID-19 cases in the country is about 1,500,000 plus. The recovery rate is very high at 98%, 1,500,000 plus then, with a casualty of 28,000 more or less. And then the active cases is about 60,000. Ngayon, if we are really, the purpose of the lockdown is for us to protect the health system, meaning our hospitals, no? Ang tanong po na nakakarami, etong mga naka-recover na to, hindi naman lahat to na ospital, no? Ano po ang rason kung bakit mataas ang recovery rate, no? About 98%, and yet not all of these people that recovered, no, were treated in our hospitals. Bakit nila tinatanong yun? Kasi tinatanong nila yon para sa ganon, kung ang purpose ng lockdown, maprotektahan yung health system, then bakit maraming nakaka-recover, ano ginagawa, no, nang hindi naman nagpupunta sa hospital?
Okay.
Ano po yung mga, meron po bang alternative medicine? Meron bang,
Ito na.
talagang
Masaya.
gagaling din yung tao?
Teka muna.
yun po ang
So
nais
let
namin
me
malaman.
tell Attorney Anton,
Apo.
if you were my medical students, I will immediately flunk you. I will fail you. Why? You are
buti na
using
lang, Doc, hindi
population.
ako
Wait.
medicine,
Listen.
no?
Listen, Attorney. Listen
Nagtatanong
first.
lang po ako, Doc. Doc, wag kayo
you-
mapipiko sa
Okay. All right.
You are
nagtatanong lang kami.
using.
At yung tanong namin na yun,
Sir, please
sangayon dun sa
listen. I'm
tatanong
answering your
natin.
question.
Attorney
I
Ariel,
am not
Can I answer
asking you
your
whether
question?
you will flank me as a law student,
Okay.
medical student or not.
So can I
My
answer
question
your
here
question and
is
let me
for
explain why I
us to
said that.
be
Let me
educated by
explain why I
experts.
said that. If you will listen, I will be able to explain why I said that. Because you are using
you need
popular.
You can explain that without insulting us. Kaya nga kami humihingi ng paliwanag sa inyo eh.
Okay. Attorney, thank you. Okay. Doc Ted, please.
Father Nick will be more polite than me. Father Nick, maybe you can help.
You can be more polite. Ako, polite naman ako sa tanong ko eh.
Thank
Okay.
you, Lawyer Inton. It's an excellent question actually.
Forgive me,
because
Father, if we are passionate dito sa mga topic na to,
No,
because people are asking questions.
Okay.
The question is an excellent question. So, I will respond in this way. If you have 100 people with COVID, each of them will experience COVID in different ways. Most of them will actually experience COVID in a way that is mild, so that if they are at home, they will be able to recover. Now, so, and depending, again, it depends on the particular variant. So in the Philippines, the Alpha variant, the variant that we had before, about 11% of Filipinos who have COVID enter the hospitals. So the 89% of Filipinos who get COVID, they have relatively mild symptoms. So they can stay at home. They might feel sick for a couple of days and they will recover. So that's very first thing that you understand, is that most of the Filipinos who get sick with COVID are actually mild. The challenge is that the 11% who are hospitalized, if you have 11% of a large number, it is itself is a large number. And so what will happen is that number, the 11%, will then overwhelm our hospitals. So the reason why we are trying to keep the overall numbers down is because as the numbers increase, the percentage of people who get sick will lead to a larger number of patients. Now, the Delta variant is actually double the hospitalization rate, according to studies from Scotland, from the Alpha variant. So if 11% of Filipinos usually have to enter the hospital, if they are sick with the Delta variant, it will be 20%. So you can imagine if we have 10,000 of our kababayans who are sick in a day, and 20% of them will enter the hospital that day, our hospitals will be overwhelmed. So we try to keep the numbers down in order to prevent the overall numbers of individuals needing hospitalizations to be down. Now, again, Sir Ariel, you're always worried about the future. And one of the things that you need to know is that as we increase the number of people who are vaccinated, the number of people who will need hospitalizations will also go down. So as we increase the vaccinated population in the NCR, the threat to the healthcare system is actually decreasing as well. So the question you asked from your constituents is an important one, and it's a matter of trying to imagine that the difference between total numbers and percentages, and trying to understand how by keeping the total numbers down, because the percentage is substantial, even though most people will not need to go to the hospital, some still will. I hope that makes it clear, Sir Ariel.
Okay.
Maraming
Pwede na ba
salamat,
akong tumagdag?
Father, na naliwanagan po tayo doon. No? So ibig sabihin, kaya mataas ang recovery ay dahil mild po ang kaso ng mga 89%. No?
That's correct.
And then the reason why we are going to have a lockdown is for us to stop the increase of the 11%.
That's correct.
No?
That's correct.
Mga kaso na mabigat.
Moderate
Tama
and
po ba yun?
severe. Oo, moderate and severe.
Okay. So yun po ang reason why we have to prepare our health system.
That's correct po.
Opo.
Because
Okay,
we
maraming salamat po.
know that the numbers are already going up, and we will be imposing the ECQ on Friday, but there is a delay for the effect. So once we put the ECQ into place for 2 weeks, there will still, do not be surprised if the numbers of people who get sick will continue to increase for a while before they start going down po. Because what will happen is you have to take into account the people who will get sick between now and Friday. So if you got infected tomorrow, Tuesday, you will not know that you are sick for a few days. And then you will not even get sick enough to enter the hospital for a few more days. So what will happen is all of the transmission that will happen between infections, that will happen between now and Friday, they will still have to continue through the healthcare system. So you're going to see a rise in cases even during the ECQ. But the idea here is that there's a 2-week lag po because the incubation period is 2 weeks. So what we will see, what we hope is that by August 20th, the numbers will start to come down and they will not have continued to rise as we see in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam and Thailand. So that is the hope and the prayer.
Okay, Father, last question, Father, before yung iba, no? Father, when we talk about the severe cases, totoo po ba na kaya severe to because this inflicted with COVID-19 patients, meron ng sakit talaga na iba?
May comorbidity. Ganon.
So thank you for that question. We are still trying to understand how some patients become severe and others do not. Now, for some patients who have comorbidities, the chances of becoming severe are higher than those who have no comorbidities. But we still have young people, 40 years old, healthy completely, who get severe COVID. So I'll tell you the research suggests that the severe part of COVID is actually not the virus. It is actually the body's response to the virus. And so we are not sure why some bodies will respond to the virus in a very dramatic way that will lead to severe disease, pneumonia of the lungs, for example, and struggling to breathe. While for other people, exactly the same age, the same health conditions, when they get COVID, it's very mild. So this is what I have to tell our listeners. You do not know if you are at risk for severe COVID. That's why we ask all people to be vaccinated, because some young people are still at risk. We do not know until you are severely infected. So it's not that the young are always mild and the old are always severe. Some mild get severe, some old get mild. Now, the probability as you get older is that your body is weaker. Yes, the chances of you getting severe are higher. And if you have comorbidities, the same thing, the risk is higher. But it is not absolutely predictive, which is why we have to remind our kababayans that even if they feel healthy, even if they feel, oh, COVID will be mild, go get a vaccine when it is your turn.
Okay.
Salamat po, Father.
Okay.
Thank you, Father.
Okay, Dr. Ted, your inputs about yung severity and moderate. You're familiar with all these cases. Yes, please.
Okay, let me just clarify first. Number one, I did not insult Attorney Inton when I said if he were a medical student, I would fail him. Why? Because he's interpreting population data with an individual's performance against the virus, which was clearly explained by Father Nick. When you already get the virus, those same statistics that you're quoting does not affect on a particular single patient. You become 50-50 based on the signs and symptoms that you have and the amount of viral load you have and the other diseases that you have. So that's why that question should not be asked, because you're interpreting it in the wrong way. You're interpreting population data with clinical data. So iba yon, no? Magkaiba yon. And if you had not interrupted me, I would have clearly explained it that way. So the key really here is vaccinating people with these new vaccines so that we can get out of this rut of infection and reinfection. In fact, I don't think this will be the last wave. The Delta wave may not be the last wave. We can continue to have another wave. This is already the third wave, because we had the Wuhan as the first wave, the Alpha and the Beta, the second wave, and now the Delta is the third wave.
Are we on
If
the
the
third
whole
wave now in the Philippines?
Yeah, I think it's the third wave. The way I look back to it, it is now a third wave. Some
In the
people
Philippines.
name it as their fourth wave in other countries, but it really doesn't matter. But globally, this is the third global wave of pandemic circling around the world. And the way to actually look at this is the way Singapore and Japan have said we need to learn how to coexist with the virus. This will be like influenza. Influenza is still here up to today. We
Yeah.
still get influenza shots every day. It happened in 1918. 20 million, sabi nga nung iba, 40 million people died in the influenza pandemic of the 1920s. And we're lucky today, we have the vaccines in months. So I think our outlook is so much better, but people need to understand. People have to remove their emotion out of this. People need to look at the science and the facts and then try to understand. That's what we are trying to do. We are trying to explain the science so that more people can understand. If they become emotional because their jobs are lost or their relatives die, we lose the debate. We lose the fight against communications.
But
Yun
Dr.
lang,
Ted,
Melo.
Dr. Ted, I was at the
Okay.
mall
Melo,
over the weekend.
Melo, excuse me, Melo, no?
Oh,
Doc,
okay.
kapag nagtanong ka sa akin ng tungkol sa batas, hindi kita sasagutin na ibabaksak kita dahil alam ko iba yung profession mo. Hindi ako mang-iinsulto ng tao ng profession dahil kanina sinabi ko nga I may be one of those uneducated na kailangan namin ng kasagutan. No? Sana maintindihan mo yung Doc na ang kinakailangan namin dito kasagutan. Kung mali yung interpretasyon ko, bakit hindi mo sinabing ganon? Si Father nga sabi, importante yung tanong namin eh. Oh, di ba? Sana maintindihan mo na iba pinag-aralan mo sa pinag-aralan ko. Pero pag ikaw nagtanong ko sa akin ng tungkol sa kaso, hindi kita sasabihan na ibabaksak kita dahil hindi ka naman nag-abogado.
Okay. All right. Now let me just be clear about this. I have with me some data. It says there are 34,771,000 cases in the United States, and the cases last 24 hours 93,943 sa Amerika. Compared to the Philippines with 1,580,000 cases and 14,157 cases for the last 24 hours. And deaths were reported at 27,000. Yung fully vaccinated ay 7,835,715 or 7.5% of the entire population. Now, ang cases per million is 15,700. Dr. Ted, hindi ba alarming ito? Sapagkat 15,070 yung cases natin per million. Hindi ba nakakabahala ito? Ganun din, Father Nick. What are your thoughts about this?
Okay, ako, my opinion about that is be careful about being stuck to raw numbers or absolute numbers. What we look at in public health are trends and trending. What is important is whether you're in a acceleration or a deceleration of the epidemic curve. Now, numbers can be interpreted at different points in time. 15,000 per so many million at an upswing can be alarming, but on a downswing is actually good news if you came from a higher level. So it's very important to look always at the bigger picture. So be alarmed kasi madaming nagta-try mag-interpret ng data and hindi nakikita yung big context of where we are. And even some scientists, no, kahit kami, sometimes we are at a loss of where we really are. So yun yung difficult sa science, no? Some things become uncertain and a scientist will not commit. He will be in the middle. And that's why you hear some statements that are even more confusing because they try to stay in the middle.
Okay.
Siguro, si Father Nick siguro has some opinion about
Father Nick.
So basically, one of the reasons why, so I agree with Dr. Ted. It's very hard to simply look at the raw numbers in the Philippines, especially in the Philippines, because in many ways, the NCR is a unique population that is different from the Visayas, from Mindanao. So there's a lot of concern, obviously, with the NCR. And that's why we spend a lot of time thinking about the NCR because of the large population, 14 million, nearly 14 million, the economic engine for the country. Is it alarming? No, the numbers are not alarming right now. I think what is alarming is people, if you look at what is happening in our neighbors, that is really alarming. And I think people who are anticipating the virus behaving in the same way in the Philippines as it is behaving now in Thailand and in Malaysia and in Vietnam may be alarmed. But as Dr. Ted points out, especially with the the mobility restrictions that that have started to be implemented this week, that will be heightened during the ECQ. The concern is not as great as it would be, say, if I was living in Thailand right now. I mean, they had 18,000 cases yesterday. I really doubt that we will reach 18,000 cases with an ECQ pending. I do not expect that kind of explosive growth, especially since the national government decided to preempt the surge. We can see that surge is growing, but it has not really attained the explosive exponential phase that it would be expected to reach in about a week or two if there were no restrictions on movement at all.
Okay. Attorney Inton, let me ask you this. We're concerned about people's mobility. I talked to a taxi driver yesterday. Sabi niya, nagpalista na ako sa barangay ko, pero 2 buwan na ako nagpalista, pero hindi pa ako nababakunahan. Eh kung merong kalatas na magsasabi na hindi ka pwede lumabas kung wala kang bakuna, paano naman yung hanap buhay ko? Hindi ko naman kasalanan, hindi ako nabakunahan kaagad dahil hindi ako tinatawag ng barangay ko. Coming from an advocacy group na tulad ng sa inyo, how sure are we that even workers in the transport industry would be safe from COVID-19?
Well, Melo, tingin ko, talagang hindi tayo sigurado doon dahil marami pang hindi nababakunahan, no? Even sa transport sector, hindi pa sila nababakunahan, no? Kailangan, no? Sabi nga ng ating mga eksperto, we need them to be vaccinated as soon as possible. So, ang amin pong suggestion ay tila nga ginawa na din naman ng DOT at Secretary na nag-i-schedule na sila ng vaccination ng mga taga-transport, no, ng ating mga drivers, conductors. So, we really need to take care of our transport industry, no? Kasi very vital yan, no? Very vital yan.
Yeah, of course.
And I think if we have to protect one sector, no? Prioritizing one sector, isa na sana yung transport sector.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But
Can I answer that?
Yes, please.
Melo?
Okay.
We have to understand that vaccination is just one of our public health measures to prevent transmission. We have implemented, and we did this successfully. Last year, we did not have a vaccine, but with the public health measures, we actually flattened the curve. So for the people who have not been vaccinated, my proposal, especially for the transport industry, the drivers, if you have not been vaccinated, you must be very obsessive compulsive with the public health measures that you will use. In fact, you're the one that is most likely to infect the public. So maybe a simple question to if you're a taxi driver, nabakunahan na ho ba kayo? And then a short answer allows you to actually have some confidence that they are protected. And then you tell them you are not vaccinated, and then you make sure you wear a mask. I've ridden a taxi driver when the taxi driver keeps talking inside the taxi. That's a very simple measure that can be done. Tell them, do not keep talking, talk only when it's necessary, because even if you're wearing a mask, some of the virus can actually come out in an enclosed air-conditioned taxi cab. So what is important is we educate the non-vaccinated so that we prevent them from even infecting others, especially if they are frontline economic workers like a taxi driver. So very important yan, no? Talagang hindi ka magtatanggal ng mask, mag-double mask pa if possible. If possible, if the taxi company can give a KN95 mask, I would be more comfortable riding a taxi wherein the driver is wearing a KN95. Hindi ko mapapasuot ng face shield kasi yan habang nagda-drive. Kasi na di-distort yung
Of
vision.
course.
But a more protective mask would actually be in the hospital. We're now using a double mask policy. We use a KN95 and then a surgical mask still on top. So things
Really?
like this can be done. Making sure the taxi is hygienic can still prevent transmission. So hindi naman kailangan mabakunahan kaagad. Let me explain. The vaccination takes 2 doses. It also takes another 4 weeks before it will take effect. But wearing a mask, a KN95, a good mask, and not talking inside public transport will immediately decrease the chance of transmission.
Mhm. Okay, thank you very much.
Melo.
Yes,
Melo.
attorney.
Yes, itanong mo kasi sa atin kung yun sa vaccination. Diba?
Aha.
Kaya sinagot natin na sana mabigyan ng priority.
Aha.
Pero yung mga driver naman sa public transport, no? Even the operators, sinusunod naman ang protocol. No? Kapag hindi sinusunod ang protocol, maski kami mismo, amin pong inaan yun, sinisita at sinasabihan po nga namin, no? Hindi lang po sa mga drivers, pati rin po sa mga pasahero, that we have to strictly comply with health protocols. No?
Okay.
But as the question of vaccination, I would still suggest, no, na i-prioritize natin yung mga taga-transport sector kahit na kahit na matagalan or what, because mas maraming kakahabilong tao ang mga nasa transport. No? So, yun lang po,
Okay.
Sir Melo.
Yeah, very good. Maganda 'tong napapag-usapan natin sapagkat it's everybody's concern. Ang hindi ko lang malaman, gaano ka-extensive yung testing sa mga taong nagdududa na meron silang karamdaman. That's why I invited the vaccine czar, si Secretary Vince Dizon. Pero I didn't receive any word from him. I texted him. He did not answer. As far as the NTF is concerned, at ganun din kay Father Nick, anong nalalaman ninyo sa testing natin? How different is our testing approach with that of other Asian or ASEAN countries?
So I will leave the NTF response to Dr. Ted, given his beautiful background there on Zoom.
Yes.
What I will say is the following: for countries that can afford it, one of the things that they do is they encourage anyone who has symptoms to approach for free testing, and there are free testing sites. Now I know, because I had in the last surge, I had UST students who had symptoms of COVID, but who refused to go get a test because they believed they had to pay, and they had to pay 4,000 pesos, which for some families is quite expensive.
Of course.
So I'm not quite sure of the current state of testing on the ground, and I'm going to refer that to Dr. Ted. But as we enter into an ECQ, one of the things that would be helpful is that if we had testing capacity that would allow anyone who had symptoms to determine whether or not he or she should be isolated. Dr. Ted, what are your thoughts on that, po, if you're there?
Yeah, he's here. Dr. Ted?
I think he might have had to receive a call. I think it's just before.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right. Yes,
thank you, Father. I got distracted. So sorry. So the question here is ano nga uli, Melo, ang question natin?
Yung tungkol sa testing, no? Dahilan
Okay,
sa
testing.
different
Yes,
is our
tama si
testing
Father
approach
Nick, no?
with other countries.
Our current capacity for testing at the national level is about 50 to 60,000 tests per day. We're only doing about 40,000 a day. So kulang yan, ano? That's we should be testing about 10% of our population. So if you compute NCR 14 million, dapat na nakaka-test tayo more than that. So kulang ang testing natin. I will admit that. We still lack testing. But that's not because madali lang ang testing. The RT-PCR is a complex test that requires standardization, molecular biologists like Father Nick, and even technical expertise in the process of being able to do the test. So people need to understand that we raised our capacity from zero to actually 250 centers all over the country. That's an amazing accomplishment for a year. But people still say kulang pa rin. And I agree, kulang pa rin. Because in other countries, I ask my colleagues, you just go to a testing center if you want to be tested. In Australia, in the UK, you will get tested. In the Philippines, again, we are prioritizing. So number one, if you are symptomatic, we test you. If you have been exposed, we test you. If you are traveling and coming in as an OFW, we test you. So it's called targeted testing. So we do a target of because our resources are not as great. And then all others that want to have the test done because they want to know, they can pay for the test. So yun yung problema, and people want a free test. Everybody wants a free load. Well, the government does not have enough funds. PhilHealth will reimburse you if it is an indicated. If it is in the list of the indicated tests given by the Department of Health. But if you say you got exposed to someone and then that someone is now in quarantine, and you don't just get tested, we wait for that person to be positive. And if that person is positive, you will get tested. So meron ding methodology. Initially, we were not testing everybody on day 1. We're now going to test them on day 5. But now with the Delta variant, the incubation period, Father, started to show at 3 days. So now people are saying, once you get exposed, we will test you. So again, mababago yan. So magkakagulo na naman yan because there is a policy unwritten, and then we have to redo that. So there will be confusion because people will need to be tested earlier. So we beg for the understanding of the people. It's based on capacity. It's like healthcare. Healthcare in the Philippines is a right. The Constitution provides that. But that right is actually a progressive right. It is not something that is immediately available. It is available based on what the government. So it's an attainable right. So the right to be tested is there. PhilHealth will pay for it, but to be able to test everyone has limits in capacity. So yan yung reality on the ground. That's the reality.
This is very
Can I have a
ticklish.
follow-up question? Can I have a follow-up question actually to
Yes,
Dr.
please.
Ted? Dr. Ted, you raised the point that the Delta variant has shorter incubation period of 3 days. Is that Philippine government also taking into account the emerging data that it might take longer for the Delta variant to actually, for a patient with the Delta variant, up to 18 days for a patient to be, quote, virus-free, given the high viral load of that variant? I'm just curious po.
We've not, that's for the other group. That's called the Technical Advisory Group of Experts, which actually decide on that. They look and analyze, and then they make recommendations. But initially, the current policy is, without the Delta, is that you don't need a test once you are, once you have developed, you're free of illness for a couple of days, for 2 days, 48 hours. So once you're symptom-free, a doctor can just certify you. Now, if you want to get tested, you can pay for that test. That means another 4,000 to 10,000 pesos based on which hospital you are. But it's not a standard policy. Now, what we are seeing is that many people continue to test positive even days after having recovered, and that's been reported. And they're still infectious even after they have recovered. And this is why this is very dangerous, and it's contributes to the high transmissibility rate of Delta. So I agree with Father Nick. We will have to implement that, and that will put a strain again on our testing, because all cases na nagkaroon ng Delta-like symptoms or na proven Delta will have to be tested before I release them to the community or to the household. That's the way to prevent it from getting more Delta cases.
Yeah, it's also ticklish about transportation. Like for example, Attorney Inton, Dr. Ted, and Father Nick. Si Father Nick nakapagbiyahe, nasa Alemania ngayon. I don't know the protocols observed. Pero dito sa Pilipinas, ang sabi nung una, pag may vaccination card ka, pwede ka nang magbiyahe. Pero dumating yung pagkakataon, kailangan mo palang RT-PCR test. I don't know, Dr. Ted, ano ba yung policy ng NTF dito, ng IATF? Depende pa ba yan sa local government unit o meron tayong national program for that?
Okay, let me explain the policy on Filipinos traveling abroad and then returning. The current policy for all Filipinos returning home from anywhere is a 10+4 quarantine policy. 10 days facility quarantine, 4 days home quarantine is allowed after you come back from abroad. Now, if that means at 10 days, you are tested at 7 days, and that gives an allowance of 2 or 3 days for the result. And then once the result is out, BOQ will issue you a quarantine certificate that you have completed the 10 days and release you from the hotel quarantine and send you home. You sign an disclosure that you will actually continue for additional 4 days and not infect anyone. Now, when the vaccination started, we revised that and said we will do 7+7. 7+7 is any Filipino vaccinated in the Philippines should actually get a 7-day hotel quarantine upon arrival from travel, and then they will get tested on the 5th day, so that when the result comes out, we will release you at 7 days, and you also sign a undertaking that you will be completing the other 7 days at home. So this is to decrease the cost to our kababayans. So these are logical. Now, recently we've also allowed the Filipinos who were vaccinated abroad. So if you're going to come home right now, bandang foreigners. So you must be a Filipino that is returning home, and then you got vaccinated in another country. You can now present your vaccination card like the US CDC card, and you will also be given the privilege of the 7+7. So right now, we've been trying to work with DICT to come up with a standard ID. Right now, as of now, a standard ID is an LGU certification. So aside from the vaccine card, before you travel, you need to go to your LGU and get a certification that is indeed a true and correct vaccine certificate. Or you can go to the BOQ, Bureau of Quarantine behind Manila. I think there are many BOQs all over the country, and get what is called a yellow international vaccination card. The yellow card is an internationally accepted card. So you can present that in any country because only the Bureau of Quarantine is recognized in the international health regulations by WHO and other governments of proof of vaccination. It will not accept LGU, it will not accept certification. It will only accept quarantine certificate. Yan ang problema sa US. Kaya nagka-complain yung mga US. Kasi hindi naman wala silang single body. They allow the states to actually, kasi federal sila. So they allow them. Sabi nila, okay na yan yung CDC. Pero sa atin, hindi natin matanggap yun kasi it's non-verifiable. Anyone can fake it. It's just a piece of paper with some writing on it. So pwede talaga siyang fake.
But Dr. Ted, you will also agree with me, there are countries who have preferred vaccines inoculated on people getting into their countries, right? There are countries...
as of now, there are only very few have officially done that. It's Saudi Arabia, I think another 1 or 2 countries, but all others, you can still enter the country. If you don't have the vaccines that they want, you will undergo their quarantine, which is usually a 14 to 21 day quarantine. So ganun lang yun. Parang our vaccines, for example, if you're referring to the Chinese vaccine, Sinovac, it's also been recognized by the World Health Organization. So if you're a member state of the World Health Organization, it behooves me that you will deny any other a person who has been vaccinated by a vaccine recognized by the World Health Organization. So I think that's fear mongering. That thing about you will not be vaccinated is fear mongering. But our government acceded to that and allowed our OFWs and seamen to get the vaccines. Luckily, we have them that are recognized by their companies or their countries where they will be residing or their destinations. So tulong na ng government yon sa ating mga OFW at seaman.
Yeah. Father Nick, yung experience ninyo, you're in Germany. Did they require you to undergo quarantine? What about your conference?
So I travel as an American citizen outside the Philippines and I was vaccinated with Moderna in the United States. So as Dr. Ted points out, I carry my CDC card with me, and that Germany and the European Union allows Americans with this card to enter. Now, as Dr. Ted points out, these cards are easily fakeable with Photoshop, but that does not seem to be a concern. This does not seem to be a concern for the Europeans at this time. I was asked to take a quick PCR test just to make sure. And then when I returned to the United States on Thursday, the United States requires that I take an antigen test to be allowed to get on the plane to return to New York. So, and actually in this case to Chicago. So different countries are requiring different credentials. And one of the challenges in the United States is that for political reasons, the federal government is refusing a standardized one-shop vaccine certificate like I know the Philippines is developing that should be rolled out in the next few weeks.
Really? Attorney Inton, gusto kong magpunta sa Catanduanes. Meron na akong vaccine certificate, pero kailangan pa rin ng RT-PCR test. How does that sound to people in the transport industry and in the safety and protection advocacy group sa transport?
Well, alam mo, Melo, kapag ka naman sa kaligtasan ng pasahero, susunod at susunod ang transport sector, no? Kung kinakailangan yon, no? At magiging maaluan naman sa pasahero, then I don't think the transport sector, no, will defy such a policy.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, meron ng mga ganyan policy na ipinatutupad ng mga ibang local government at yun nga, sinusunod naman, no? Sinusunod naman ng mga ng public transportation.
Okay. All right. May tanong dito, Dr. Ted. You may refuse to answer the question, but the question was sent to me. Baka kasi wala sa probinsya mo ito. This may be out of your province. Magkano raw ba talaga yung mga bakuna? Yung Sinovac, yung Pfizer at iba pa, dahil meron daw reports na mas mahal yung Sinovac kaysa Pfizer. Totoo raw po ba ito? Magkano ba ang bili natin? And how important is the non-disclosure agreement? Because as far as I know, yung NDA would only apply during the negotiations. And it will be revealed after the purchase. I don't know. I may be wrong.
Yeah, I also haven't seen the contracts and actual pricing, but I can tell you we are getting a lower price than the global market because economic status, we negotiate for a lower price, we buy volume. So what happens is the prices change based on volume and your capacity to pay. So iba yung rates nila, parang hotel room, may mga different rates. But I can tell you that the what I've seen, and I don't know if it's verifiable, is that anywhere from $4 of AstraZeneca to all the way to $19 for Pfizer. Yun ang mga nakita ko. And that's within the global market range of prices that we're selling. Yung Sinovac, I don't know how much we bought it. I will tell you for a fact that if I look at it, Sinovac has cost our government more, but it was important to actually start vaccinating early. And why does it cost more? Because as a public health person, we know that when we implement mass vaccination, it is very expensive to use single-dose vials. We always buy multi-dose vials for our measles, rubella, chickenpox, and all these other vaccines because the production is cheaper and the cost will be cheaper. We are paying for each vial of a single dose. Whereas for the other manufacturers, they give us a 5-dose vial or a 10-dose vial. It actually gives a lot of savings. So now I don't know why Sinovac didn't offer a multi-dose product, but I think that's part of the negotiations also that will make it cost higher. The other thing we're doing is that some vaccines we pay landed on cost. That means they take care from manufacturing to the country the cost, while other vaccines like Sinovac, I think we pick it up from the manufacturing plant. So we pay for an additional freight cost. So tayo nagbayad ng freight. So hindi siya landed cost, parang freight on board. I don't know the rules of this. I'm not a doctor, but I'm not a businessman, but I know there are different ways of how you import stuff. And iba-iba. Because we did a portfolio of vaccines, the negotiations were different for each manufacturer, and the pricing also changed based on the negotiations arrived at. So yan yung mga ano. So to compare prices might be illogical because Israel bought Pfizer at 3 times the market cost so that they can be first. So pumayag ang ano, so they bought it at almost triple. Can you imagine that? They bought 3 times that's the $25 per dose. Binili nila. Pero because of that, nauna sila. And then they vaccinated older people with the Sinovac. So ano yan, those negotiations are very different where everyone has to look at context. And I worry when an auditor comes in and looks at the prices, he doesn't understand the context of when these vaccines were. Remember, the global market for production of vaccine could only produce 5 billion vaccines for 2021. 5 billion times 2 yun, times 2 doses per person. That means we have a shortfall of 2 billion. And sad to say, alam ni Father Nick to, some countries bought 6 times their population. So inagawan nila yung middle income and low income countries ng vaccine. So napilitan tayo kumuha ng Sinovac. Many countries napilitan kumuha ng Sinovac. So eventually, yan yung sad part of the business of medicine. So yan ang problema, geopolitics and the business of medicine.
Yeah,
but in fact, it should be all about saving lives.
Doc Ted, so is it all right to say na wala pa rin nakakaalam ng cost effectivity kumbaga ng mga bakuna?
The cost effectiveness of the vaccines are the most cost effective measures in medicine. Dalawa lang yan discovered in healthcare. First is potable drinking water or safe drinking water, which are cost effective. So if you invest in safe potable drinking water for a community, you are cost effective. And the second one is vaccination. Vaccination is the other public health measure. So if you invest 70 billion, which is what we did on acquiring these vaccines, I think it's well worth it. I mean, Israel proved it by paying triple the cost, and they're reaping the benefits. By the way, Delta is raging in Israel, but there is a disjunction between the hospitalization and the numbers of cases. So their numbers are high, but they're mostly mild and handled at home. So which just proves the vaccines work. Actually, the vaccines work. And that's what we're seeing as well among our healthcare workers at PGH. Parang ang baba-baba ng aming mga doctors and nurses that got infected. So the vaccines do work, and I think they're cost effective. If you ask me, they're cost effective. I don't have to go into the science. They're cost effective.
Yeah. Okay. Father Nick, would you care to add to that?
No, I like I said, you know, if vaccines allow us to have Pasco back, I think a lot of people will say it was worth every single peso for us to be able to return to the life that we have missed for over what will be 2 years. So, and it is unquantifiable, the life that we have as a people, as a family, as families. You cannot put a price on that. And so if it costs 70 billion pesos for us to return to a life where, you know, we are singing and we are dancing and we are going to Simbang Gabi, I think no one is going to complain that this was one of the best investments that the Philippine government has had in many decades.
Okay. Another question, Dr. Ted Sabe, why are we still buying Sinovac when Malaysia and Singapore aren't using it anymore? Because it's not effective against the Delta variant. Reuters reports say Singapore doesn't count Sinovac vaccinated, and Malaysia will no longer buy after they've exhausted their supply. Would you have anything to say about this?
Well, number one, please be careful with news articles, because news articles are not we scientists depend on. We'll look at the real controlled science. When a news article now writes something about efficacy of a vaccine, I consider it an opinion of the writer. And if the writer is not a physician, I immediately junk that information. Or not a physician or not a scientist or an epidemiologist, I will immediately junk that opinion because that is a personal opinion converted into news. So taken fake news yon. Sinovac works because there are many countries that actually took Sinovac and the people are protected. And if you look at the microcosm, PGH is an example. We have healthcare workers protected as well. There's some infection, but the infection rate is actually very low. So if you ask me, uh, what the people do not know is that Sinovac or the what we call inactivated virus was rated by our vaccine expert panel as the most effective, most efficacious. So we ranked our seven vaccines. Our number one are the inactivated viruses, and that's the technology used by Sinovac as that's the oldest methodology to do a vaccine. The second one is the protein subunit. Unfortunately, that's the one manufactured by Novavax in India. So that's supposed to come in October. But the protein subunit is the second most commonly used methodology, and it was also rated number two. Our number three is the viral vector, and this is where the Gamaleya and the AstraZeneca fall in. So it's part of genetic engineering. You splice the genes and use a mild virus like a cold virus and put in the spike protein there. So that's also been used for a couple of decades in vaccine technology. The mRNA was rated last, but the people read social media and the people read the news articles and think mRNA is the safest and most effective because of that 95% report in a particular. We don't know because now we're seeing that these people, these vaccines may have other effects, other side effects that's not been discovered yet. So eventually, time will tell whether mRNA vaccines are really going to be accepted. So ano pa yan? Uncertain pa yan to me.
Okay.
And we've never used mRNA technology for vaccination. This is the first time. So this is a global experiment, if you ask me. And
So,
I don't know, I'd like to ask the opinion of Father Nick on this because what do you think of the ranking made by our vaccinologist and vaccine expert panel?
Well, first of all, what I will do is I will cite a paper from the New England Journal of Medicine from a couple of weeks ago that looked at the vaccine profile of Chile. And it's important that you know that Chile uses Sinovac, Coronavac, and though they do not deal with the Delta variant, they have the Gamma variant. And the Gamma variant is just as nasty as the Delta variant. And what they're seeing there is that it's protective. It has protected the people from the Gamma variant. And so the expectation is even if the protection may be lower, there is still significant protection from the Sinovac. Now, with regards to the ranking of the vaccines, I'm actually, this is the first time I've heard of that ranking, but it makes sense to me because you're ranking it based on how long of an experience we've had with the technology associated with that vaccine. So inactivated vaccines, we've had around for 100 years plus.
300 years.
Yeah, mRNA, basically, this is the first
Zero.
bit, right? Yeah. So, and it's interesting because even with children, so a lot of people are asking me about children. I am wary, I say if you have a choice between Sinovac and Pfizer for children, I would actually go Sinovac. And they will say, why is that? I say, one, children as a whole are not as great of risk. So they will tolerate a, quote, less efficacious vaccine. But we know so much more about the inactivated vaccines and their effects on the biology. And given that the children are going to go through puberty and who knows what else, in terms of risk benefit, I would choose a Sinovac over a Pfizer for our young people. And so it's going to be a risk benefit analysis for every group and every class. Now, I do not have access to the Sinovac data. So Dr. Ted, hopefully you have access to the data. Unfortunately, the data, the Sinovac data has been slow in coming, unlike the Pfizer and Moderna and J&J, which has been published and peer reviewed. You have the Turkey data and the Lancet, and then the Chile data, but the Brazil data is still in medRxiv. So I'm still the Brazil. So the Brazil data has not yet been peer reviewed in a peer review publication. So I've read the data, but because it's not peer reviewed, I tend to be very, I'm waiting for the Turkey data in the Lancet 2 weeks ago, to the best of my knowledge, is the first peer reviewed set from the clinical trials from Sinovac. Now you have population studies from Chile, which is helpful. But I'm assuming that if you are a member of the vaccine expert panel, or you have access to those, you have a much broader view of the data associated with the Sinovac that I have not had access to. So I'm going to trust your reporting, because I don't have access to that data, right?
Okay.
I've seen all the other data, but certainly not Sinovac. And I'm wondering why the company doesn't simply just do it and publish it. This is the danger, because it feeds conspiracy theories that the Chinese company has not published a combined clinical trial of Indonesia, Turkey, and Brazil. I mean, I don't understand where, it's been a long time. It's coming on 8 months since we've started vaccines already.
Okay. Father, before we wind up, and I request for your messages, baka may tanong si Oscar Ruida of GMA7. Oscar, you have some questions? Please go ahead. Oscar. Wala yatang tanong si Oscar. Let me know, Oscar. Father, what's the latest on your research on the yeast vaccine?
So this again is a novel vaccine platform, and we have begun the mouse studies. In fact, I had to work out what to do during the ECQ, because someone has to go and feed the mice during the 2-week interval when we have ECQ. So hopefully our mouse studies will show us, whether or not this will trigger an immune response, maybe in 2 months. And then I have to figure out how to deal with monkey trials, because the next thing I understand is to undertake a monkey trial before we can apply for a permission from the national government to undertake clinical trials.
I see. So you need volunteer monkeys, no?
Yes. In fact, I'm returning. One of the reasons I'm back in the States is I have to develop the Delta variant version of the virus, of the vaccine. So the one we are testing now is the original Wuhan plus Alpha and Beta coding sequences. But now we have to do the Delta and the Delta Plus as well.
Okay. Attorney Inton, for your message to our audience, to the general public, we have viewers from New York, from Saudi Arabia, and of course, from the Republic of the Ilocos region and the Bicol region. Please go ahead with your questions.
Yes, Melo, maraming salamat sa pagkakataon na nagkaroon tayo ng paliwanagan sa Tapatan sa Aristocrat. Marami tayong natutunan, maraming paglilinaw, at marahil sa mga susunod na araw, kapag nandun na tayo sa ECQ stage, ay ma-attain ma-attain ang ating pamahalaan yung objective. Para sa ganoon, hindi na sana tayo magkaroon ng ganun ka-strictong quarantine status. Kahit masabihin nga natin na kalusugan ang ating inuuna, kailangan din yung ating kabuhayan natin mamamaya. Mahirap po ipaliwanag kapag naapektuhan na po yung mga hanap buhay nila. So, with the explanation of our experts, sahan niyo po na tayo po ay magpapaliwanag rin based doon sa ating natutunan ngayon, para sa ganoon makatulong tayo, lalo-lalo na dito sa transport sector.
Yeah. Thank you, Attorney Inton. Para kay Dr. Ted at kay Father Nick, mula kay Oscar Ruida, pinahabol niya, maraming nababother sa protection na dulot ng Sinovac against the Delta variant. Is it true that those who opted for Sinovac has less protection? Dr. Ted?
Actually, we don't know. The answer is we don't know. What we know is that the Sinovac is protective against death and against critical illness. Very high, about 100%. So even with Delta, I think the people that receive Sinovac are protected. By the way, as a bias, I received Sinovac. And I studied the data of Sinovac, and I saw that the 50% or 70% efficacy they were talking about is 50 to 70% prevention of mild illness. I don't want to prevent mild illness. It had 100% prevention of severe to death, severe illness and death. So I prefer to get that. So I'm more okay to get a mild infection, 2 or 3 days of cough colds, but I don't want to go in the ICU. I don't want to be intubated. So I think that's the confidence I will give to the people asking that question. If you had received Sinovac, you are protected from death and severe illness. You will still get infected, maybe mild, maybe moderate, depending on your constituency. But at least we know for a fact that you will be saved from immediate critical attention or death.
Okay. Yeah, Father Nick?
Well, I again, we know from with the other vaccines that there is some decrease in the effectiveness or the efficacy, depending upon which population you're looking at, with the Delta variant with regards to getting sick. But as Dr. Ted points out, it is incredibly important to understand, and this is something we'd like to communicate to our kababayans, that we would not be worried if you get COVID-19, if COVID-19 was a mild cold. In fact, there are 4 other coronavirus that give us colds. So this could be the 5th one. So if we make COVID-19 an ordinary cold and all of us get several times a year, that is fine. What we are most concerned about is that when you get it, if you get it, it will not be severe enough that you will be hospitalized, let alone die. And all of the vaccines that people have studied show a very high protection against severe disease and death. And this is why we urge our kababayans to receive the vaccine when it is their turn, regardless of the brand. Now, I know Filipinos are brand conscious about everything, but one of the things I point out, any protection is better than zero protection. And people who are waiting for the so-called better brands, you will not get it for 6 months. And in that 6 months, you might get COVID and you might end up intubated. And better to get the Sinovac, better to get whatever vaccine is available to you to protect yourself and your family, especially the lolos and lolas amongst us.
Okay. I'm just as concerned as anybody else because I just don't know whether it's Al Jazeera or BBC or CNN, which reported this morning while having breakfast. I saw that 2 vaccines have increased their price by $5 at least. So how will this impact on the Philippines, Dr. Ted?
Well, okay.
Yeah, Palinik.
Well, I mean, it's very clear from the beginning that we are dealing with pandemic pricing. So all the prices that Dr. Ted cited are actually what are called pandemic pricing. It is very clear that after the pandemic ends, these prices are going to skyrocket, especially in the United States. Certain companies have promised that developing countries will always have access to pandemic pricing. But one of the things I have learned working with people in business is that this is not necessarily the case. If there's pressure from your stockholders, it's going to go up. So yes, the pricing for these vaccines is going to go up. I can guarantee you that in the years to come. I mean, Pfizer announced it has made $20 billion of profit in the last few months alone. And that was with pandemic pricing. So you can imagine the kind of profit horizon it could have once officially the World Health Organization officially declares the pandemic over. Which is why the Philippines needs to become vaccine autonomous at some point.
Okay. Dr. Ted, additional input?
That is right. Father Nick is right. And in fact, that was one of my projects when I was an Undersecretary of Health. I was pushing for a vaccine self-sufficiency project, which had it continued and had not been stopped by our predecessor, would have allowed us to produce vaccines the way Indonesia had contracted Sinovac and produced it locally. But
Yeah,
about the pricing, I think what's important is that these manufacturers are for-profit companies. They're not there for they're not
charity.
there for charity. They're there for and the manufacturers have moved away from single drugs to vaccines. This happened in early 2000. In fact, we've allowed vaccines to be sold even at phase 3. All other drugs cannot be sold on phase 3. You've got to finish your phase 3 trials and then go to market. And that was the criticism for Dengvaxia. We were cheated by Sanofi because they marketed a drug that wasn't completely finished in phase 3. Now, when it comes to vaccines, I think the key is safety. It's not cost. The key is safety. Prove to me that the vaccines, indeed, mRNA vaccines are safe and effective, and I will buy them even if it's a $10 cost as an investment for my people. So that's very important. What Father Nick said, vaccines are not expenditure costs. They are investments to a country's economy.
You said something like you had a program for us to be self-sufficient in vaccines, but
Yeah,
it
we
was
had we actually have phase 1 and phase 2. We produced some levels of tetanus vaccine and BCG. We have phase 1, phase 2. We were actually implementing a phase 3 to phase 4 of a phase 3 vaccine self-sufficient. That means a fill and finish lab at the RITM. So that we could have bought that with the government funds, but this was diverted by our predecessors, the one that came after us,
predecessors or
and scrapped.
successors.
Successors.
Successors. Okay. Well, I'd like to end our discussions today with a very warm thank you to everyone, to our colleagues from the media, to Dr. Ted Herbosa, to Father Nick Austriaco, who's still up and about in Germany. It's about 4 o'clock in the morning. Pwede ka na magbibingka at puto bongbong pang simbang gabi. And Attorney Ariel Inton, who took time out to be with us. Sayang, walang nakarating from DOH, from MMDA, and from the designated vaccine czar. Or testing
Uy,
czar,
ako
should
yun.
I say.
Ako yun. So
Oh,
from the
yung,
vaccine czar.
yung sa
I was asked
testing,
officially by
oo.
Secretary Galvez to
Yeah,
represent
yung
me.
sa testing czar, walang representative. Gusto ko sana
Ako din yun.
malaman.
Kasi NTF din yun eh.
Sa inyo rin yun.
Oh,
Okay.
no, si runs a meeting every morning, 9 a.m. on Monday. So he really cannot make it.
Okay. Anyway, we're happy you made it. Thank you very much.
Yes.
God bless us all. Until next time, see you, Father, when you return. Okay? And we can
Stay
have
safe,
that.
Father. Stay safe.
Okay.
Sige,
Thank you.
Melo. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.